All right, I think we can get started. So, welcome everyone, and today we're going to talk about SharePoint, workflows. But before that, I'm just going to give you a little introduction in case it's the first time that you're joining us. My name is Kwa, and I work for a company called NIFTIT, and we specialize in SharePoint and Microsoft Office 365 solution. And we have a few hubs, one in New York, one in Vietnam, and in Hong Kong. And we organize a lot of events, and this webinar notably, and discussing various subjects, notably around SharePoint solution, SharePoint development, integration, trainings, and Office 365 solutions. So if you want to reach out to me, here's my contact information at the right bottom. You'll see my email address, Facebook, Twitter, in case you have any further questions. All right. So today we're going to take a look at SharePoint workflows. And this session is really meant for like power user business analysts. I'm not going to dive too deep into the development aspect of it. Actually, it's another sessions that I'm planning to host. But so far for this session, what we're going to review is the histories of SharePoint workflows, the tools that are set and available for us in order to work with them. And we're going to see the basic of SharePoint workflows, so like built-in workflows that are provided to us via the SharePoint platform. We're going to review SharePoint designers and the features and actions that are available to us. And the bulk of it, I'm going to try to set 15, 20 minutes apart, like to do the demo, which is really like I believe the most interesting part of the presentation. And I will save up a few more minutes at the end of the session for a little Q&A. And another note too is that we're going to really focus on SharePoint workflows when it's relevant to like the latest Office 365 platform, as well as 13 and up in regards to like an on-premises environment. But let's dive to it. Like, why are we using, workflows or SharePoint workflow for that matter? Definitely for automating tasks. And it seems pretty logic, but the idea behind it is that it's going to allow any organization, small and medium, to save time and eventually save money on some of the manual process that are being implemented at the minute. It definitely helps to improve communication, whether it's making sure that things that needs to be signed are signed, things that needs to be approved are approved. It's going to definitely leverage this automation power to provide that accessibility to the data for all the organization users. And one of the main purpose of the use of a workflow in the context of a SharePoint environment too is to reduce the ability for human errors, and so that way you have something that is a little bit more standardized, that is less subject to human errors. And as you introduce workflows into your organization, obviously you're going to see an increase of performances, and eventually you want to improve that process. So getting in automation and workflows within the organization definitely raise the questions around like what can we do better, what can we improve along the process, and therefore improving the overall process of your organization. So now, in terms of the history of the workflow, because it's a bit interesting to see what was done from the Microsoft SharePoint team, there's definitely two eras. There's like the pre-2013 and the post-2013 era when it comes to SharePoint workflow. And so prior to 2013, on the 2003 version of SharePoint, you didn't have any workflow that were provided out of the box. There was one, and that was done for like simple approval, but I wouldn't call that necessarily like the suites of workflows. That was that one and only one, and you had to rely on third-party solutions in order to implement any type of workflows. And usually those would come, at a very expensive cost, and therefore, not fit for every organization. But then when Microsoft rolled out the 2007, they definitely took a hearing of all the feedback and integrated out of the box workflow engine, and that was based on foundation, workflow foundation in that framework 3.0. Anyway, like what it meant at that time is that SharePoint had an underlying workflow engine that was hosted internally, and all the solution anyway were deployed on premise or on a secure environment. Then we jumped to 2010, and they added few features like the site workflows was an interesting one. The workflow template, the ability to reuse those templates across multiple environments of SharePoint 2010 environment was interesting. But the main key feature right here was definitely the adding of the visual tool through Visual 2010. And then the break for me at the very least comes in 2013 when they introduced the Workflow Manager, which basically allow you to add a little bit more feature. We'll review that in the next slide. But the Workflow Manager was definitely like an advance in terms of how the workflow would run on the environment and how it was deployed and maintained in terms of the code and the workflow itself, so that the organization could reuse that and also expand their workflows through their organization. And so if you want to learn more, like I will share the slides. There's a great article right here that I put right here that explains really in depth the difference between the 2010 and 2013, but basically between the two eras and what differentiate them greatly. So when it comes to building SharePoint workflows, beside the out of the box, and we'll review that, but there's definitely 3 tools that are given to us, and it depends on your level of comfort and where you sit. So you're going to have Visio, SharePoint Designer, and Visual Studio. And so depending on where you sit, once again, in this context, I'm going to talk about 2013 and upwards. Depending on your level of comfort, you're going to have to use one set of tool or another. So Visio and SharePoint Designer are really meant for like end user, power user, business analysts, and even developers when it comes to like very simple or common workflows that don't necessarily requires like app development, for example, or intense debugging. Visio, in the sense of it's not necessarily running or creating the workflow per se, but it will give you the schema or the structure for the workflow. And it's something that if you have Visual 2013, you can create the visual for workflow and the schematic for workflow. And that's great when you're presenting to clients. You can present the entire workflow without having a SharePoint instance running on your environment or connecting to any SharePoint online premise, online environments. And therefore, it makes it kind of like a draft, showcase, or a review tool. All the visual work that you do, you eventually have to import it into the SharePoint Designer in order to build the actual workflow. So the SharePoint Designer is another tool. It's a free tool that can do more than just workflows. But in the context of workflows, it's going to allow you to create the workflows on premises or online. You're going to be able to reuse those workflows. And the only downside of it is that if you're using SharePoint apps, you're not going to be able to include those workflows generated within SharePoint Designer into that specific application. And Visual Studio really default back to like developers and default back to the rest of the workflow that are not conceived within the Visual SharePoint Designer sphere. Usually it's to get SharePoint apps workflows. So if you're building an app and you do need to have like certain workflows running on them, then you have to use the Visual Studio tools. And I think the greatest interest for the developer at the very least is that you have the tools that are available for any .NET project or Visual Studio project, such as source control, debugging, and you can create your own set of workflow custom activity that you can after that integrate to the SharePoint experience. So those are the tools available. It definitely depends on your level of comfort. In this session, we're really going to focus on the SharePoint Designer because for me, I believe that for novice all the way to like even medium usage, it's going to be a great tool. It have already built in a lot of power, and you can do quite a number of workflows with it. So before I talk about the SharePoint Designer tool and SharePoint Designer workflow, I'm just going to make a quick side note on built-in SharePoint workflows. When you install SharePoint or when you have access to a SharePoint online environment, you're going to have access to some of the workflows that are provided to you. And those are site workflows that are already created by the Microsoft team. All you need to do is create them, and then after that, customize them without code through the UI, through the web experience. And so it varies from like approval workflows all the way to like disposition workflows. That means if you want to remove certain items, getting permission on those. And those are great too. I think, people just getting into the SharePoint world, if they don't know that exist, they should definitely play with them because most of the time when we do get projects, for example, those are generally the workflows that are intended to be built. And so instead of spending time, building them custom, just know that you have some already created that will fit most of the use case and that are available out of the box within the SharePoint environment. And I will demo that live after this slide. In regards to the SharePoint Designer 2013, what you have is a tool that is basically connecting to your SharePoint environment that is going to create a workflow utilizing actions. So you're going to be able to create a set of steps that will allow you to basically generate some of those actions. So it could varies from core action, list actions, task actions, utility actions. So core, like the name indicates itself, it's a pretty common actions that are needed in your SharePoint workflow. So it's things like doing calculation, logging into history lists, sending emails, jumping to other stage. This we'll use them quite a bit in our demo, and I will show you that in a second. List actions, you're also able to do that if you want to do things like check-in items, check-out item, update list items, anything related to like list actions or document libraries actions can be done with those actions. Task actions are going to be things like assigning tasks and starting task processes. So when you have your SharePoint workflows, usually you have like you have the option to assign a task list around it, and to interact with that, you'll need to use the task action. In the 2013, we will also introduce a bunch of utility actions, so things that were missing in the previous versions, such as like extracting substring, trimming some of the items. that are provided to us. So those are, I don't know why they said it there. It could have been in core actions too, but they're really related to like manipulating and transforming data. Coordinations are going to be items and actions related to like starting a list workflow or starting another site workflow. So within your workflow, you could eventually start another workflow that you built. So those are within the coordination actions list. And then project action, if you have project server or project online associated with your subscription or SharePoint environment, you're going to be able to leverage a specific set of actions that are related to like project server. In any case, like what we are going to take a look at too is the new features, like what was really improved and made available on the 2013 version, which are like stages. You're able to create a number of set actions and group them into stages, so that way it will make more sense in terms of the development aspect of things. You're going to be able to see more clearly what is going on, but also use conditionals in order to run into different stages or different bucket of actions. The ability to create loops now is provided within the SharePoint Designer 2013 workflows. The ability to create rich text email, which was lacking from the previous version. So you're going to be able to add, links and anything that will be a rich editor to an email. And one that I'm going to demo and that I really use quite a bit when working with SharePoint Workflow is the call to web services. So now within your own SharePoint workflows, if you have to perform certain actions like calling web API or retrieving data from it, you're going to be able to use that within your SharePoint workflow environment. And that enrich really greatly the ability and the extent of the features that you can do with your workflow. So I'm going to jump into the demo. Before I do that, I'm going to give 2 minutes to go back to my chat window and see if there's any questions so far. But feel free to type. I'm just going to monitor that real quick. But in the demo, we're going to take a look at building built-in SharePoint workflow, using initiation workflow parameters, doing a call to a web service, using loops, and things of that nature. So let me take a look at the chat in the same time. Okay, seems no questions so far. Great. So we're going to jump directly into the session and into the demo. So I'm going to exit this slide right here. And what I'm going to do is pull up my SharePoint environment so that you can see it. Right here. Okay, so we're going to create a new document library, and what we're going to do is play around with some workflows. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you the built-in SharePoint workflows. So just to give you a little bit of context, I'm using a SharePoint on Office 365 and SharePoint Designer 2013 for this specific case. But let's go ahead and create a new app. And I'm going to create a document library, pretty standard. And I'm going to call that employee reports, for example. Travel reports. I'm going to create my application, and once you do that, I'm going to navigate to it. And so for those who are new to accessing the workflow via the web, or not familiar with the new SharePoint experience, you're going to notice that you can access the workflow via the library settings. So you click on the library settings, and right here, you're going to see the workflow settings. So once again, the built-in workflows, very accessible, especially for like end user. If you want to create a new workflow, you can see right here that we have no SharePoint workflow associated with this current item. And so what I'm going to do is add a new workflow. And right here, I have two workflow that I can select from. So I'm going to use 3-state workflow right here. And this is basically used to track an item. It's used to coordinate the status, I would say, of SharePoint library list item or document library list item. So I'm going to give that the name of and right here, it's going to ask me also to select a task list, a default SharePoint task list. So I'm using the workflow task list. Right here, I could as well create a new one if I wanted to, but I'm just going to leave it as default, as well as a workflow history list to keep track of the information relevant to the workflow. And same thing, I could choose to create a new workflow list, but here I'm just going to use the default one. So every workflow that you have, whether it's done via the built-in, via SharePoint Designer or Visual Studio, like you're going to have to set up some start options. And in this case, the only options provided to us is to make sure that this workflow will run when a new item is created. So I'm going to set that up and click Next. So because it's a 3-state workflow, it's going to require me to add some kind of choice column to this specific document library properties, so that way it can navigate through the different state of the workflow. And in this case, because we're using a document library as the association to our workflow, there's no default status field to the content type document. So we're going to have to create a new column and associate that. And you'll see that it will reflect instantly into the workflow association. So what I'm going to do is go back to my travel report right here. And I'm going to go to the settings. And I'm going to create a new column right here. And I can call it status. I can call it current stage. But here, status is a and like I said, it's looking for a choice field. So we had none prior to that, so we're creating ours. And I'm going to create like this 3 states. So I'm going to say, well, it's going to be open, it's going to be pending, it's going to be closed. And here, I'm going to give a default value to that, and I'm going to click OK. Right here. So if I go back to my 3-stage workflow, now you can see that it's automatically picking up the status field because it's the only choice fields that we have available. And then the initial state of the workflow is going to be open. And then there's going to be a middle state of pending. And then after that, close right here. And for each options, they're going to allow you to set the custom notification that is going to trigger at the start of the workflow. So right here, it's saying specify what you want to do when the workflow is initiated. Okay, so I want to create a custom message, workflow initiated. Of course, that makes sense. And I'm going to include in this list field the name of the document itself. And in the task list description, I'm going to put a workflow has been initiated. That's as good as ever. What I'm going to change to is the content of the email. So again, when the workflow gets triggered, initiated, who am I going to send it to? So per default, is going to send it to the person that has the task assigned. And who got the task assigned is the person that created the current item. Obviously, I could go custom and set it to a default person. It could be my manager. It could be the person working in a different department. But in this case, I'm just going to assign it to the person that created the item, and that will trigger an email to them. We could add also other people or emails to this specific trigger, but here we're just going to leave it as default and say like this message triggers as new items created. The status of this item says this item is open. And then after that, it's going to ask you the same type of information for the mail state. So like once it goes and someone changed the status to the pending stage, what it should do. So I'm going to leave everything per default too, because I'm the only user right now. And I'm going to say, well, you know what, the status has been changed to pending, and please review this item. Okay. I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to go ahead and create our workflow and associate it to the travel reports library that we have created. So what we want to do now is test that workflow. What I'm going to do is add a new file to this. So I'm just going to take this screenshot. And just by the simple fact of adding it to the library or creating a new item into the library, the workflow is going to get triggered. And in order to see the current status of the workflow, what you can do is select the specific items that you are running the workflow on and go into the workflow session right here. Once you do that, remember that initially we didn't have any workflow, but now we have one, the status workflow, and it's currently saying running in progress. So as we refresh, the started dates, the internal status might change. Here, I'm just going to jump back to my email, and as you can see, the trigger right here were generated to me, the person that created the item right here, and also to the person, the task right here. So the task was assigned to me too. And so if I wanted to, I can click here, review the items, and then after that, go ahead and change the properties associated to that item. So same thing, if I go and change that specific items, let's go back here. If I change that specific items property to pending, I will receive another set of email. So all I need to go do is go to the properties. In that case, change the status to a pending status. And it's saved automatically. All I need to go back is go back and wait a little bit. So the status of this item is now changed to pending, and I should receive a second set of email that will inform me that there has been a change and that I need to go ahead and take a look at that. So for that 3-state, and specifically to that 3-state item, you will notice that the workflow will be in a continuous state of running until it's set to close or until the workflow comes to an end, execute, right? And so if we were to change the status to close, then the workflow will be completed and it will display right here. If you want to see more information on the workflow itself, the one that is currently running, you can see right here, like if there was any task that was associated to it, the workflow history. So right here, it was initiated by me at this time, and here's the email coming in. And I can see like the specific workflow that we was running on and the items that I should be reviewing here. So everything looks in order. If there was anything strange with that workflow, though, you could also enter the workflow from this specific screen. Again, to access the workflow, you need to be at least a contributor to the SharePoint document library or the list that you're reviewing. So if you're just a regular user, you just can't access or impact any of the workflows available on the screen. So that's it. That's like the built-in workflows and how to navigate them. Obviously, each of the workflow have specific fields and steps that comes with it, but you have the ability to create that very quickly without any assistance of a developer and directly from your web browser. Now, we're going to take a look at the second thing that I wanted to show you, which is the initiation workflow program. And to do that, first I'm going to trigger my SharePoint Designer. So I'm just going to go right here, SharePoint Designer, and run that, and open the site that I'm using for the demo. So if you're not familiar with the SharePoint Designer interface, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's basically kind of like Microsoft-ish like. So you get your tabs, you get your ribbon up top, you get the second set of navigation on the left-hand side. So nothing too crazy. And you can do a lot more than just SharePoint workflows again, but we're going to focus on the specific tabs and page that relates to that. Right here. So we land on the general tab, and what you're going to do is go to the workflows right here. And from this, you'll see all the workflows associated currently to this specific site or list within this site. And we're going to be able to create a new workflows from there. So let's go ahead and click on list workflow. And what I want to find is my travel reports document library right here, and click on. Okay, so it's going to ask us for a name and a description, which is pretty simple. And then it's going to ask you to choose the platform to build your workflow on. Okay, you have two options. You have 2010 and 2013. So when you're on Office 365, you always have the two choices. When you're on an on-premises environment, if you do not have Workflow Manager installed, you will only see the 2010 workflow, because obviously the 2013 workflow engine needs the Workflow Manager to be installed on your environment in order to create and run the SharePoint workflows. So my advice is always to use the 2013 workflow. You have a lot of the features that we've discussed in the slide, such as like the web core APIs, the loops, the stages that are only available on the 2013 workflows. You won't beneficiate from those features if you go to the 2010 type of workflows, right? But because there was a legacy or backward compatibility purpose, they wanted to make sure, Microsoft, when they released 2013, they wanted to make sure that the workflow that were created in 2010 would still work in the platform. So that's why you have the two choices available to you. But going forward, you should always use the 2013 workflow if available to you. And so here we're going to create a workflow that will prompt the user using workflow initiation parameter. So let's call that like initiating workflow. As soon as I hit create, it's going to land me to the design view of that specific workflow. So you can see from the ribbon right here, we have option to save and publish and check for error, which is actually pretty nice. But anyway, if you do a mistake in the workflow, won't allow you to publish it. So it would check for errors automatically. And then right here, you're going to have your condition. So you can set if statement if needed. And here are all the actions that I was talking about in the slide. So you're going to see the core actions right here. So pausing for duration, your list actions, checking in, checking out, updating, utility action to trim or find extract of substring. All of that in that little call to action from the top. You have the ability to create different stages too, right here. So everyone can be, like I said, done for different purposes. It's visually more pertinent to have like different stages when you have like complicated workflows. And then you can transition between different stages too, using conditional logic or just using a linear workflows if needed. Here I'm just going to delete that back. You have your step, and right here what I wanted to talk about is the initiation form parameter. So basically that allows you to prompt when the user run your workflow to certain information. So for example, in our case, since it's a travel report, what I would want to do is ask the user when they add a new item and when they run this workflow to indicate me with the 2 letters where this report is coming from. So whatever country it's coming from, give me the 2 letters abbreviation that represent that. So I'm just going to go ahead and create and hit that and create at. So I'm going to call that country abbreviation. So this is the name of my field, and the description is this is the abbreviation. Yeah. Finish here. Show on form. Okay, so maybe we should right here. So we have our initiation parameter. So I'm going to save that. Okay. And now that I'm here, what I'm going to do is retrieve that, so log that into the workflow history list, so that way we can see it or see if there's any case of mishappening. And I'm going to select it from the workflow variable and parameter right here. So I have our country abbreviation. And what we're going to do is set standard email. And I'm going to email the user that created this current item. And I'm going to tell them, well, this uploaded item is related to this country. So I'm just going to put the abbreviation right here. So I need to find the workflow variable and the country abbreviation. And okay. Okay, right here. So once again, I was telling you about the rich emails. So right here, you can bold, you can center, you can do, you can add hyperlinks and things like that. So I'm just going to do a simple text. And every stage needs to have a transition stage. Even if it's the only one that you have, what you'll need to do is, in that case, set the transition stage to end the workflow. If you had different stages, you could jump from one to another using that particular item, or even reflect back to the current stage. But here, we're just going to end the workflow and show you the initiation parameter. So I'm going to publish this workflow. And once it's published, I'm just going to be able to go back to the web, select the item that we've just uploaded, and run this new workflow that we've just created. You're going to be able to see that it's going to prompt the user to answer do need to wait for it to finish though. Okay, it's done. It's going to prompt the user. Workflow for a country code. So we're going to go right here, and you can see that I have my initiation workflow parameter right here. I just need to click on it. And before I can even run it, it's going to ask me, well, you know what? You have to set this param. So right here, I'm just going to say, well, it's US. Let's start this. Right. So I use the country as an example, but it could be a set of questions that you have to ask the user to answer, such as the built-in workflows, where you can see, well, what's this name, what's this, what's that. So you could ask your user prior to running a workflow a series of questions using those initiation form parameters. I use a simple one. Once again, mine was a single line of text, but as you can see, you could use like a date and time. You can ask them for like a choice, and then after that, request that information so that you can run the actual workflow. So if everything went out okay, what I should receive, or what I should have received, is an email with the current abbreviation code. So to see the status once again of that workflow, I'm just going to go more workflow and see if it's still running or if it's in a pending stage. So the status workflow is currently running. Oh no, that's not the one. This is the one that we just created. So you can see that it was completed. So I'm just going to check my mailbox and see if I was able to retrieve that. Right here. So I'm just going to show you right here was the email that I received from the current system. All right, so that's initiation form. So I'm just going to go a little quicker because like we have like 13 minutes left. I'm going to show you how to use a web service to make your workflow a little bit more interesting. All the other options from the core actions are pretty self-explanatory. It's by playing with them. You know, like for example, checking out an item is pretty self-explanatory, or checking in. So I definitely invite you to do that. I'm going to go to that one because it's a really good feature in the latest version of the workflow. So what I'm going to do, and what it allows me to do, is call an HTTP service. And so I have this service already set aside, which is basically open web API that for each country abbreviation that you give will provide you with the full country name. So, for example, we asked for the abbreviation, and in this case, what we wanted to retrieve really is the full name. So that way we standardize the data retrieved from the workflow. So here is, I need to find this item. It's right here. So here's the reference API right here. I'm going to use this public API. It's not related to SharePoint. It's just something available out there. And I'm just going to be able to dynamically retrieve the full name of the country. So let's go back to our SharePoint workflow right here. And what I'm going to do is call this specific HTTP service. So I'm going to copy this right here. I'm going to put it right here. The only difference right here is that instead of setting up the value statically, I'm just going to dynamically bring it from the country code that we have, the initiating workflow parameter. Okay. All right, cool. And in the response right here, I'm going to create a new variable that is going to store the response of this specific request. So this is going to be the response country here. And what I'm going to do next is log this specific item, so that in case of debugging or in case I'm not sure, I'm going to be able to retrieve the information retrieved from that variable. Log that right here. And what I want to do then is get from this specific dictionary, so the response country, I want to get the country name. So how do I do that? Is to get the path to that specific location. So right here, it's REST response result name. So I'm going to separate everything by a / and it's going to allow me to retrieve that country name. So response, REST response results. And what I want to do is set that specific return into a new variable. So I'm going to create a new variable and I'm going to call that country full name. And it's a single line of text right now. Okay. And just to make sure that it worked out, I'm going to email user. I could as well like create a new item or exchange the property of a column. But here I'm just going to, for the sake of time, I'm just going to email the person again who created this item. And I'm going to set the value of that to the country full name and publish that. So if our call to services, it could be a call within SharePoint actually. SharePoint have its own set of REST APIs endpoint. So it could be creating or performing action within SharePoint or outside of SharePoint, anything that have like HTTP web service would be available through this particular method. You could retrieve like client ID from, Salesforce if you wanted to. Anyway, we're going to test that, and this particular item, we're going to create a new file. I'm going to upload this image, for example. And right here, I'm going to run, once again, updated workflow. And if everything works well, what I should retrieve, what I should retrieve is an email that provides me with the proper country name. So we'll wait for the workflow to run. In the meantime, if there's any question, feel free to just type them in. I'm a little over the session or my timeline actually. So if you have any questions, feel free to set them apart, and I'll definitely read them as soon as I receive this workflow. Oh, I know why. Because I'm not running it from the right list. The right list is not reports workflow, is site travel. So give me a second to change that. So yeah, you do need to be in the right document library in order to run the workflow. If not, it's not going to work. So right here is our list. I'm just going to go back to the workflow. I'm going to do the initiation param. This time I'm going to change the init value to FR. And if everything goes well, I should receive the email with the friends as the subject of my email. Okay, while we do that, let me take a look at the question. Right. So I have a question. I have SharePoint 2013. Is there any advantage compared to 365? In the context of SharePoint workflows, not really. It depends on one service that you need to install. Once again, it all default down to the workflow manager. And if you have workflow manager installed, in terms of the workflow that will be created within SharePoint Designer, it won't make any difference. Once again, the codes or the workflows that are created within SharePoint Designers are declarative workflows. That means that there's no program per se, like everything is declared within that specific workflow. So it's not necessarily needing your specific SharePoint server or Office 365 to run them. It's going to run on an externalized service. And in the case of an on-premise environment, it's going to run on the Workflow Manager service. So advantage in terms of workflows, not really. Between a 2013 on-prem or 2016 on-prem and a Microsoft Office 365 SharePoint environment, it's definitely going to be the same. There's another question. Can you manage item permission on SharePoint 2013 workflow? So if you're talking about like setting items permissions or editing the permission for a specific item, you can trick the system to do it, but per default, it doesn't get you an action from that. So you can see like the list action right here, like you can check in and create list item and delete from them, but you're not going to be able to per se set permission. So one way to eventually trick it is, in that case, you might want to use Visual Studio and create your own action, and then after that add it to your environment so that it will be available as a core action. But as default out of the box, that action is not provided. Can we add item and attachment in email? I remember that you can't not. So you can't do that, but let me verify that for you. Yeah, you can't set attachment. And I believe the reason why is because it will, where would you store that specific document? Like, or where would it be coming from? Like, this is not necessarily like a full mailing services. What you can do within item in SharePoint, what you can do is look up for them and return their server URL right here. It's the server URL or the source URL right here, so that it's not an attachment, but again, like you could have that as like, please see the following fact, and you can look through the current items within your list or other list or document library within your SharePoint environment. But attaching a different set of files, unfortunately, that wouldn't be available at the current minute with the SharePoint Designer 2013 context. All right, so let me go back and see if I received anything. And no, I haven't seen anything. All right, well, I probably have to cut this session into 2 next time, so I'll probably have to show you that. But the basic idea is that you do get the ability to call to external service. That's unfortunate for today, like it didn't work out. In my case, I did receive F4, but I didn't receive the full
full country full name. Yeah, so probably make sure that this happens next time. We run out of time, so I just want to make sure if I'm covering any other question that you may have. So if everything's good, what's going to happen is like our team is going to send out the email that will contain the slides, so that way you can review that. If you have any question, again, feel free to reach out to me. The information are on the slide, and it will be followed up by a feedback survey. So it could be what you want to talk about for the next sessions. How do you feel about this specific session? And we can move on from there. So I want to thank you, everyone, for joining the session today. I went quite fast, but not fast enough. Usually I covered this in 2 hours, so it was it was a little harder to crunch everything in 1 hour time slot. Feel free to reach out to me once again if you have any other question. Really appreciate you joining us today. And if you have any needs for SharePoint specific workflows question, reach out, and I'll be sure to get on track with that. Thank you, everyone.